of Wargaming on the Ear Firm Network.
Frederick the Great. Talents, Ruses, and Stratagems.
Welcome to the Art of Wargaming on the Ear Verm Network. I am Yogg-Malark.
And I'm Thumbs.
And we are coming to you today to talk about talents, ruses, and stratagems. But before we do that, I am just still so stoked about being here in the Warshed. Because it's very clean.
I love that you call it, always sounds like you're saying the Warshed.
That's the pun I warned you about before we came in.
The Warshed.
I told that to my wife earlier when I was like, you know, I call it the Warshed. Do you know why I call it the Warshed? And she's like, because you make war in a shed. And I was like, no, because it's very clean. And I just looked at her. And she was like, I don't get it. And I just made like the washing motion with my hand. And she was like, no, just no.
The worst.
And so at that point, I resolved that I had to tell you that joke. But anyways, so we're here, and I'm very pleased. It keeps coming together. I know I'm promising you guys pictures of this, and honestly, this next week, the last of the decorations will be arriving, so I will be releasing our... actually, at this point, when you hear this, we'll probably already have it out. So go to our Instagram and check it out, but I have like a catalog or a detailed photographic document... what are those things called? You know,
Portfolio,
sure. Or how it's made basically of how we transform this common garden shed into a podcasting studio / wargaming studio / office / I listen to music out here and just unwind place. So yeah, I'm very happy about it. I'm going to be rambling about it, of course, for the rest of forever probably. So yeah, it's wonderful. But I had my first game here. That's why I'm bringing it up today. I'll find a new reason to bring it up next week. But today, we had our first game, and it was my apprentice Turkey Feathers who came over, and we were playing some Kill Team because
we broke it in. Yeah,
we broke it in, and I have a board, a big Warhammer 40k board that's coming that we're going to be able to play games on, and eventually I'll have terrain painted up, and we're hoping to do some YouTube videos for battle reports. It'll be a lot of fun. But it was just awesome to be able to game finally in this space, and so he brought up his Blood Angels because that's what he plays. And I was playing my Death Guard. I rolled. I had 3 armies that were prepared: my orcs, my demons, and my Death Guard. I got my Death Guard, and it's a 200-point list, but there's only 5 models, and they're all Terminators. And if you know anything about Death Guard Terminators, you know they are thick boys. And these guys, I had the flail, of course. You gotta have the flail, and it was good. He won. It was actually a really good game. The dice favored him toward the end, and he actually had some good tactics as well. I want to talk about what he did because the tactics he used were really good. Half of his team were like wielding they had jump packs, right? Mm-hmm. And then they had hammers, and some of them had a pistol, and some of them had a shield. But it was obvious that their whole point was to get up close and say hi to you, right? And then he had 5 dudes in the back line who were all armed with long-range weapons. And so what he had was a group that came forward and engaged my slow Death Guard and kept them from getting across the field. And then you had dudes in his backline who were just laying down cover fire. It was Space Marine Tactics 101, and it worked brilliantly.
That's classic right there.
Yeah, it was perfect. I hope to see him not just use that tactic in the future, but also improve on it because it was really good, and I wanted to talk about that because I was really stoked about seeing that effectiveness.
Is Blood Angels his only army?
At this point, I think so. He has some knights, so he does have some Imperial Knights, and then he also occasionally plays Salamanders with his Intercessors, or with his Primaris Marines. But primarily he does Blood Angels, yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, I think Turkleton might be the only person I know that only has one Warhammer army that plays 40k.
Yeah, the rest of us are pretty diversified. Like, I've got, 7 that I play? 8, if I'm being generous.
Anytime I know someone that's like, I'm going to get into it, I'll just get one army. I'm like, no, you're lying to yourself, friend.
It's like getting into Belagarth and saying you're just going to have the one sword. It's not happening. That's just like you're lying to yourself, friend. I told myself I was going to get on Ultra Sabers and buy one lightsaber. We just drove up Ultra Saber stock.
Yeah, I've made like 5 swords since the quarantine has started.
Oh, sure.
I've made 2 armor sets in the last year. I already had one that was perfectly functional.
Yeah, if you're new to hobbying, again, any of you who are old hobbyists, this is old news to you, but new hobbyists, be prepared to become creative with your storage space options because you will need it. You will need it. My wife and I, for instance, we're both huge nerds. And therefore, we have a lot of crap. For instance, my library alone occupies all of our walls, basically.
Yeah, no, you've seen mine.
Yeah.
It's
Same thing.
when people are like, "Oh, I'm like, I've got 5 bookshelves of comics," they think I mean
Little
like
ones.
a shelf,
Right.
No, I mean like a bookshelf, like the whole bookshelf.
What goes to the ceiling.
That's about my height. Yeah, so I'm about 6 feet tall, and I have like 5 or 6 of those full of comic books.
Sure.
I have 4 spears. I just got rid of 2 of them. I'm already working on making new pole arms.
My living room, hallway, and bedroom are also just full of books. I have an entire corner of my bedroom that is dedicated to my incredibly reduced armory. Since this nerve crap started, for instance, I had to get rid of my spears because I can't spear with a dam anymore. Even with that, I still occupy a full corner of my room with all that. And then, of course, my Warhammer stuff is scattered all over the universe because I've got 7 armies. But yeah, so we had the first game in the Warshed, and I was just really excited about it. But yeah, Blood Angels, I'm hoping to be able to talk about more of those. I'm trying to rope Thumbs into having one of these Kill Team games as well at some point. So
I've agreed to play, but as we've discussed, I have several expensive hobbies, so I'm a little hesitant.
I'm not saying you have to buy anything. As we've discussed, I have 7 armies.
My friend, has that ever really stuck on
I mean,
Warhammer players?
This is also the same tactic that crack dealers use to get good customers.
First try's free.
It's free, man. It's fine. It's fine. You're not going to want any more.
We're friends.
Everybody becomes a plastic pusher at some point.
That's what I do with Belagarth.
Oh, for sure. You have to, because the best part about these games is doing them with other people.
Oh, and I'm the worst. I directly make stuff for people, and they're like, "It's so nice." I'm like, "You're literally just giving me excuses to hit you. If you're better equipped, I can hit you more."
It's the best way to do things. It's how you make friends and practice your skills.
Man, when I was giving away spears, the spears I was given, I gave one to the realm and one to the guy that's holding on to it for the realm because I didn't need them anymore. I already have 4 nicer ones.
Sure.
And as he was leaving, and I hadn't seen Orn in, I don't know, since March, February. And as he's leaving, he shouts over my shoulder, "I can't wait to hit you and your family again." And I'm like, "God, my neighbors do not know what this is." Oh my God.
Yeah. To people who don't necessarily know what we're talking about, we seem very, very violent. And I mean, we are, but in a controlled, consensual sort of way, you know. And that's with any wargaming, whether you do Belagarth, Dagger here, SCA, Amtgard, any of that stuff. There's a certain degree of it's okay to hit your friends in a certain way.
If you're just hauling off on them, that's less good.
That's not cool. Yeah. And speaking of doing things with friends, of course, we're in quarantine. So the people that I'm inviting up, Thumbs and Turkey Feathers, we're all doing really well at keeping to ourselves, keeping the quarantine. We're not meeting in large groups and all that sort of thing. But there's still a huge amount of social interaction that's missing. Of course, we're not hanging out all the time, and we're keeping our distance when we do. And so Turkey actually started up an ARC server that we've been on, and honestly, it is more team-oriented than I would have expected. When I first got onto it, I was like, is it a survivor game with dinosaurs? I am sold. The little kid in me that went nuts for the Deinonychus is just losing his mind right now because I'm on an island full of dinosaurs that I get to play with. Or rather, they get to eat me, but that's something else entirely. And so that was kind of my idea of it. And then I start playing with Turkey, and I'm like, whoa, there are so many different levels of teamwork that you can do on something like this when you're either building your base or going out and trapping dinosaurs or going on hunts. Like having somebody there to back your play is so important. And it kind of like, originally I wasn't going to talk about the ARC server on here because I was like, it doesn't really have to do with wargaming. But because it does focus so much on teamwork, if you and your unit or realm or your team or whoever you are, your group that normally meets and is not able to meet right now because of quarantine issues, I would recommend maybe getting ARC.
Yeah.
Because it's a really nice way to hang out and have a little tribe and still work on teamwork and communication, all that good stuff. And then also get to, play with dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah. Really any kind of video game that's multiplayer, even if you're versus each other, can be very good for this because it's just a bonding experience. Squire Yui and I, since we live in the same house, play Mario Kart together all of the time. Because I have a Nintendo Switch. There's certain games I can't play ARC on it, but we have Mario Kart, and we have very passionate battles with each other over it, but it's a very much bonding thing.
Right.
We have also learned to very carefully, when we are talking smack, to insult the character and not the driver.
Yeah, that is a good distinction for sure.
I will say extremely mean things about Luigi, but not Yui.
Sure, of course. That's a little bit that it's not personal. It's just friendly competition. A little bit of bravado goes a long way for friendly, as long as everybody knows that.
A little bit of adrenaline coming out, and yeah, no, it's great. And then there will always be, in our case, it's Toadette, but every Mario Kart user has that one CPU character that causes problems for whatever reason. And there have been times where we have definitely teamed up of like, we're trying to get, one of us needs to get this gold medal, but Toadette's in second. So whoever's not in second, whoever's in like third and fourth, their entire job that race, Toadette.
Yeah.
Or Wario. Or whoever.
Peach is always, it seems like Peach has it out for me. Every time I play, it's like Peach is the one that lobs the blue shell at me.
Baby Daisy.
Yeah. Now I play Waluigi, so I'm used to being hated by everybody.
Oh no, I'm on Team Waluigi with you here.
Right
so
on.
Yeah.
Right on. But you also did something else. Like, it's not just playing these games, but you also did like a building session while maintaining social distance.
We did social distance glaive building party, and we admittedly did this in my backyard. This is the first time I have seen people other than you my coworkers in
and your family.
Months. Yeah. And I should say, while this is happening, there is only been about 500 cases in our entire state.
Right.
This is so like if we were in a place that was having a much bigger problem, this would not have gone down.
Sure.
But we hung out in the backyard. We all wore masks as much as possible. We stayed 6 feet away from each other, like using the stricter safety requirements than the state is actually asking of us right now.
Right.
We all got together and we built glaives.
Nice.
Little glaives, and we'll see how they go. We were using a practice or a new kind of core that I'd never used before, and it's a little flexy for my tastes, but
so those of you who don't know what a glaive is, I want you to picture a sword on a steak.
yes, it is a naginata if you're into Japanese stuff. It's a pike is another pretty good. It is a polearm that you can slash and stab with.
It is sexy, is what he's saying.
Real nice. And I'm not very good with it because I've never owned I've owned a big heavy glaive, which has its points, but I've never owned like a technique glaive before. And that's kind of what I'm aiming for. And if this one that I'm making works out, it's a little shorter. I want it's about 6 feet, but like 4 of us are getting it. So we're just going to pop up on the realm like, aha!
Nice.
And they're all light enough that you can just use it one-handed if you need. Like no kind of technique fight with that. But like if you lose your arm.
I love the first like 3 or 4 practices that occur after a big equipment switch up, because like everywhere you go, any realm you go to, people are going to fall into a habit, into a routine. Certain weapon styles are going to become more popular, and you're going to get certain focuses in your realm. So when something like what Thumbs is suggesting here, when he's got all these glaives that we're going to be introducing to the realm all of a sudden, it's going to be interesting to see whether people go stronger towards shields or whether there's a polearm response, more archers. Like the meta always changes.
Well, and what's fun with these is it only ever takes like one person to really change up, and other people are like, that looks fun, or I don't know how to fight that, so I'm going to do it. One person, Turkey, actually started using a min red.
Yeah.
So I built a min red. So my squire built a min red. So like 4 other people. And next thing I knew, we had a practice where there was like 8 min reds on the field of like 15 to 20 people.
Delicious.
The archer had a great day.
Yeah, no, they would. No, they would. And so like we're saying here, like this is what we're talking about, where one person or a group of people changes one thing, it'll change the whole meta. And of course, this goes outwards, goes to the event and goes to like the national level, because people then go to events and they see the meta change, they bring it back to their realm. There's a constant, beautiful swirling of information and ideas. And that's kind of what we're talking about on this show, isn't it? Like this. And speaking of delicious, this chapter,
what a segue,
is delicious. Thank you. I was working on that. But this chapter is absolutely delicious. Again, all of what Frederick writes is really good. This book is widely regarded as one of the most brilliant works on military strategy that has ever existed.
And Malark will tell you about this.
Yes, I'm a fanboy. But most of the chapters are about 50% solid gold, and then 50% very specific things that you're not going to be doing, probably, hopefully, like invading Morovia or Bohemia.
If you need to go back in time 300 years...
Some section would be great, yeah.
And invade Bohemia, which I did actually know was a real country for a long time.
You just thought it was a term?
No,
or something?
yeah, like because Bohemians, like it's
very different than actual Bohemia.
Yeah, the things you learn.
I wanted, it's escaping my mind right now, but I feel like there's some research to be done there as to why the term Bohemian exists and seems to contradict so heavily the actual country/city state of Bohemia that existed in history. I think that's my homework. In addition to all my other homework, I'm gonna bring that back next time. We're gonna talk about Bohemia and why that term exists. But yeah, so this chapter, like I said, most chapters are kind of 50-50. 50 really useful stuff, and then 50% stuff that is situationally useful.
Yeah.
This chapter is solid gold, like the whole thing.
Useful stuff.
Like there's one paragraph where he references something very specific, but it's in order to illustrate a point. Like this chapter is just one of the most broadly applicable, and it's because it deals with things that are that you deal with in your everyday life, and then especially that you're going to deal with in any sort of physical or intellectual wargaming. Because this chapter deals with the talents of a general and ruses and stratagems. And so these are like, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about demeanor, we're talking about personal qualities, and we're going to get into it just after this musical interlude with the talents of a general.
So I have to admit that I was not surprised at all when you're like, this is my favorite chapter. And it's basically about the chapter of subterfuge and conniving.
And it's also about like the way you present yourself in mind games. And we're not talking like bad mind games, but if you've ever sat at a poker table and done so successfully, you have done so because of mind games.
Mm-hmm. And you love mind games and deception and subterfuge and conniving.
At least studying.
You actively enjoy conniving.
I do. Studying
and it's perfect because this is, dissembling while being occupied is literally our first chapter, subject.
First bullet point,
Thank
if you will. And so to define this, dissembling while appearing occupied is the first thing that Frederick advises under these talents of a general. So throughout this chapter, he's kind of listing personality traits that you can cultivate to be a more effective battlefield commander. And this also works if you're doing any sort of intellectual wargaming too, because these kind of mind games, like I was talking about in poker, are important for interacting with your opponent in an advantageous way to you. So dissembling while appearing occupied. This word dissemble means to obfuscate your true intentions. So I use another big word.
Yeah, I was going to say, you made that sound so much clearer.
Let me try again. To dissemble means to hide your true intentions.
Much better.
Much better. While appearing to be occupied. So the idea here is, and it's not necessarily, you're not trying to lie, but this is a matter of inspiring confidence in your troops. Because let's say that the battle is not going your way. Let's say that things are kind of on the back foot. You don't want your troops to think that. You don't want your troops to lose heart. You definitely don't want them to lose confidence in your ability to lead them. And so dissembling while appearing occupied is disguising the fact that you really feel rather anxious, but you're not letting it on to them. And this is also against your opponent. So if like I'm in a Warhammer 40K match and my opponent does something, makes a move that like really upsets my plan, the worst thing I can do is have any sort of facial expression or verbal expression or body language expression. See where I'm going with this?
Comes up exactly with the general we're talking about in the book we're talking about. And I have already forgotten the name of the battle because I don't do names. But the battle from early on in his career where he basically had it won, but he's like, oh no, I'm going to lose this, and left the battlefield.
Right.
And they lost because it turns out a really good way to lose is for you to leave. Because if a rout starts, if people start running, an organized retreat, you can still kind of pull off a win. If they start running, it's over. So if you give them reasons to think they need to run, it's done.
And especially the leadership. Again, we're talking especially to like the generals, the captains, and the lieutenants. We're talking to the event coordinators and to the unit leaders, the team leaders out there who might be listening to this show. It is important to not let your troops know that you are stressed out. Now, this is not to say that you always have to keep it bottled up inside. You need to have a confidant. Now, whether that is one of your trusted lieutenants or a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a good friend or whatever the case may be, you need to have somebody in order to let that stress out. But it needs to not be to the troops because they need to have that confidence in you. My mind is drawn to my very first battle for the ring down in Southern California. And down there, I witnessed Sir Anna, who was a powerhouse.
Oh, she's amazing.
Of an event coordinator. Like I got there and it like, to my impression, from my perspective, she was just standing in the middle of this event, and everywhere she looked, she would just point and there would be order. She'd be like, you be doing this, you be doing this. She was just delegating flawlessly, and just everything looked to me to be moving smoothly. The event to me, to everything else felt. It felt real good. It felt like a very smooth, well-polished machine. And at the end of the event, I told her as much. I walked up to her and I said, Anna, this is one of the best events I've ever been to. I can't believe how smooth everything ran. I'm just so impressed with the way you did it. And she looks at me and she says, thanks. I feel like I was flying by the seat of my pants the entire time.
One of the advantages that just beyond it, Anna has been very good at gathering up a group of dedicated people.
Oh, she has some great lieutenants. Yeah.
And they've been doing it for years now. So they know their stuff. And so they can come to her with that specific thing, and she can make the choices that need to be made. But it also gives her a dedicated group of people when she's just like, that she can go talk to one of those people. You have to remember, all the advice in this is about a military. These people are there. They cannot leave. They will get killed if they leave.
Desertion bad.
I know I say this in like every episode. We are wargaming. You can't do all event coordinators, and I kept thinking of event coordinators in this chapter more than any. Like all leadership stuff is good, but
right,
dang, event coordinators in this one. If your volunteers get too overloaded and don't have fun, or if you overload yourself, which I have done,
burnout is what that's called.
Yes, stop playing, and then someone else has to relearn everything from scratch. So it is very important to appear that you are confident and sure what you are doing. Just to pull it back to what we're actually talking about. But you have to have those other people.
Now, in that same vein, now we're not saying that that there have been times in history where a leader has lost their nerve, and I don't mean this as a slight against them. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm not trying to throw shade, but leaders lose their nerve, and at that point they become ineffective leaders. When
you run from Alexander the Great twice, it turns out it's really hard to keep leading the Achaemenid Persian Empire.
It's such a general.
Yeah, I couldn't specifically be talking about who was that, Cyrus II? I don't know.
One of them Persians. We didn't study that for this week. But no, and so this is an important thing, and it's important on all levels of wargaming. Of course, we talked about the big things like 40K or anything like that. The tabletop wargaming, you got to make sure you got your poker face on, is what he's saying here. Make sure you have a poker face. Make sure your opponent doesn't know when you've done something that's really good either. Remember, I said earlier that if my opponent does something and I react poorly, he knows that he needs to keep doing that. Well, the other part of that is if I do something and it goes really well for me, and I show that, then my opponent knows what my plan is because I'm reacting positively. So you got to keep it on the DL for the good and the bad.
Yeah, and the bad is one I definitely have to work on most kind of gaming. When it starts to go too bad, I have to struggle to make sure I'm not pouting. And I keep trying to make this face at you, and
they can't see
they can't see it.
But like when he's talking about pouting, what you're seeing is the shoulders drop. The face drops. The eyes become featureless. The mouth...
the brow furrows. The lip kind of sticks out a little bit.
If I see that face at a tournament, I'm going for your throat.
I've got it.
That's what I want to see.
You will be mine.
Yeah. No, that's the one. And that doesn't... And this is everywhere. We're talking, again, tabletop wargaming, we're talking in like large team fights as well. And we're also talking about against another opponent one-on-one. I want to make sure that if my opponent does something that throws me off balance, he's the last person to know about that. If my opponent drops their guard a little and I suddenly see an opening, I don't want to show that I'm happy about that. Because if I suddenly am just like grinning ear to ear, they're like, wait, what I do? Where am I open? Like that's what that says. Whereas you just remain impassive. You gotta remain impassive to what's going on around you. And in this same idea, another piece of advice that Frederick has is to be ceaselessly suspicious while affecting tranquility. And it's the same idea of like on the outside, you look peaceful. On the outside, nothing can bother you. That thing that your opponent just did, of course, it was just according to plan. No big deal. Whereas on the inside, you are examining absolutely every angle. You are looking at every approach and being like, is that dangerous? You are looking at every feint and being like, or every retreat and being like, is that a feint? You know, you want to be suspicious of everything you see. Everybody you come across could be a double agent. And this is talking like in the larger army, and something like Belagarth where we all go off and kind of party afterwards and it's a larger community, less so. But on the battlefield, you have to be ceaselessly suspicious because you want to understand that every single one of your opponents is trying to deceive you. Every single one of them wants to keep you on the back foot and wants to catch you off guard. And so understanding that, you got to make sure that you're suspicious. But in this same mind, you don't want to let people know that you're suspicious, right? Because if
horribly complicated.
It is. Well, we were talking about it earlier, and it's the idea of if you're standing there, let's say on a Belagarth or an SCA field, large group combat, and you're looking around from side to side inside your helm. You want to keep your head relatively still. You don't want to be like head on a swivel, make it look like you're super aware of everything. But you want to be like, okay, out of the corner of my eye, oh, I see 4 people over there who are a little close. I better be aware of that. Across the field, I've noticed that these 2 groups go at each other pretty early on. I'm going to be aware of that and see where we might be able to go in. On the outside, you look bored.
Yeah.
On the outside, you look like you're just standing around waiting for stuff to start. But on the inside, you are looking at every single angle of attack.
And while I'm standing there with my shield a little down, I think of it as the Valis stance, to be honest with you. The board stance, yeah. I have that like, if they take 2 steps closer, if they take 3 steps closer,
danger zone.
I am going to burst into action. That's when stuff is going on. But if I burst into action too soon, they know I'm ready. Same time, you can't let suspicion turn into hesitation.
Right. There is this going too far, which is when you stop motion. Remember that basically every single military tactician that we have studied so far says the worst thing you can do is nothing. The worst thing you can do is make no decision whatsoever. You got to do something.
And people think they get that. They're like, oh, obviously. And then you're leading a group for the first time on the field, and there's people just 3 steps away from the danger zone right there. And there's that big group over there, and you could probably take them, but man, it's gonna cost you to do that. And then, man, those people just noticed you over there, and I'm pointing all over the warshed, and it's not. Sorry, guys, it's very late.
Eventually, we're gonna have video of this, but not right now.
And it's real easy for your brain, there's too much information being taken in, and it just kind of stutter stops.
Now remember last chapter we talked about the concept of the intuitive laying of the battlefield, where you can just kind of look at the battlefield and understand where your forces fit into it. That's what you're trying to get to. Obviously nobody starts out there. You have to have experience. And so one of the things you have to understand is, especially early on, you have to make mistakes. Not that you're going to make mistakes. You have to make mistakes because that's how you learn. Look at Frederick's own military career.
He made mistakes.
He made a lot of mistakes, and every single one of them he learned from, and he built on, and he improved his army, improved his command style. All the greats make mistakes.
If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn how to fix them.
Right.
It is very similar to, I was real smart early on in life. I was way ahead of the rest of the kids, and when I was in grade and middle school, and I never learned how to study because of it.
You didn't need to.
And then once it became time to study, I had no idea how. Like once I needed to, I did not know how, and that's still something that I struggle with at 31.
What's interesting is I had the exact opposite thing go on. Like I came into school, and because of whether or not you believe it from Thumbs' descriptions of me, I don't always get along with people. And when I was early on, I really hadn't learned to control my temper. And so my early experiences in school were like, grade wise, I didn't do well. I feel like I was a fairly intelligent person, but I just did not respect the authority of the school system and did not want to engage with it. And so early on, my career suffered, like my academic career, because of that kind of view. Later on, like in middle school, and especially early on in high school, I had some teachers that really showed me the light. Like obviously I'm sitting here and I'm doing a podcast that is based on doing a lot of research and doing a lot of note taking. Obviously somewhere along the line it changed, and I have several teachers in high school and middle school to thank for that, because they showed me the benefit to knowledge. They showed me the benefit to study, and study in a specific way, a scholarly form of study. And this really came together when I got into college and I got to study the things I wanted to study. I got to focus on military history and religious history, and I got to look at those things and really embrace the things I was passionate about, and then learn this scholarly approach. And so like now, my young self would not recognize me. Sitting here surrounded by all these books, like taking notes constantly and like being diligent in note taking and basically doing homework for a living, he would not recognize me. But yeah, no, it's interesting how things shape us as we're going up. We've gotten massively off topic.
Oh, never. Not on a podcast.
We don't do that on the show. So, going back to our point here, being ceaselessly suspicious while affecting tranquility, it's the same idea as the poker face. You want to be examining the odds, but you don't want your opponent to know how mentally involved you are. You want them to think you're bored. You want them to think that you're just sitting there not paying attention, because that plays to your benefit, especially if you anticipate it. So the next point that Frederick makes is the idea of working the mind and the body. So some people have talked to me and they're like, why do you do a podcast on something like a physical wargaming like Belagarth SCA? Why do you do a podcast on that and Warhammer 40K, like specifically, but also tabletop gaming in general? Like, why would you think that, like, that this seems kind of convoluted? Aren't you mixing your subjects? And Frederick would agree with me when I say no.
I was going to say that just seemed very natural to me when you're doing, because there's tactics in both sides.
And Frederick says you got to work the mind and the body. You got to sit there and play your war games. You got to think of your scenarios. You got to put yourself in your hypotheticals in order to work the mind and really be involved. But also, to be a good warrior, you have to know how to make war. You have to know what the troops on the ground are experiencing. If you've never held a sword in your life, how can you expect to command people who do?
I mean, it's a huge problem that anytime an army has stopped worrying about that when it comes to its people in charge, it tends to backfire.
Right. And that's because the two disciplines are related. Your physical wargaming will get better if you start doing like strategy games and stuff. And your strategy games will get better. Your intellectual wargaming skills will get better if you start fighting. I guarantee it.
Oh yeah, because your reflexes get better.
And it becomes intuitive. And once that is all in there, and it becomes a larger picture, it's all about perspective, right? You see something different from being on the ground than you do from the bird's eye view. You see something different when you're doing one-on-one than you do on large group combats. These are not separate worlds. These are not separate ideas. All of these ideas come together and help one another. And so I think that's why Frederick recommends working both the mind and the body, because they benefit. And then also from his perspective, if you're working your body and you're the commander, let's say you're not directly involved in the fighting.
Oh yeah.
But you still have to hoof it with the troops. You still have to climb them mountains and do those forced marches and appear rested and confident at the end of the day.
If you're too tired and out of breath to do anything, and they can see the like pit stains on your uniform, it's not going to work.
If I'm looking at my commander and I'm like, dude, you are way more winded than I am. Like I like there was a sergeant when I was in the Army, not to throw shade, but my sergeant when I was in the command or the intelligence section of the reserve unit here, that sounded authoritative.
The place and the thing.
He was one of those sergeants that was in the last several years of his career. He was just waiting until he gets to 20, doing the bare minimum on PT, doing the bare minimum basically just to be able to get his retirement. And now at this point in my life, I can hardly blame him for it.
Yeah, but your body's not working as well anymore.
Right. But at the time, like I was this young guy who was really into PT, and I see my commanding officer barely being able to keep up with me. Like not being able to keep up with me in the field, becoming absolutely exhausted by things that were just normal to me, and not being able to do his work. And so I didn't really respect him. because he wasn't physically capable of remaining alert and functional while he was doing stuff, and that was his own fault, you know. And again, at this point in my life, I'm like, the pension would be nice. So, so the next point that Frederick brings up, and this again is important on all levels of wargaming and normal war, and we've talked about it in the last 2 books, so it makes sense that because it's a good concept, it comes up again. But the idea of economy of force. And Frederick says that you need to save the blood of your soldiers and not squander it. And this is good for several reasons. The first one being your soldiers are going to like you better.
Oh, yeah.
If they don't think that you're just going to throw their lives away. Like, the whole point of war, obviously, is to fight. The whole point of war is to go in and potentially risk death. But to do so needlessly, to do so recklessly, nobody wants to do that.
Now, hear me out here. It turns out that people don't like dying.
Really?
I know.
Wow. Especially painfully.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Like with, pikes that we were mentioning before, or muskets.
Or even fake dying, like when we're doing Bellegarth. Like, I'm sure most people would prefer to win than to lose. Yeah. And to be around for that victory, yeah.
We had a new person once that was like, "You're not taking it easy on me, are you?" And I'm like, "Of course I am. I've been playing this since you were 6.
Yeah.
Like, if we didn't go easy on you, and not like
Let
throwing
you win.
away the fight, but like, if I win 100% against you every time, you wouldn't win once. That wouldn't be fun for you.
You wouldn't want to play no more.
You still have to earn your win against me. But I'm going to let you get that. I'm going to let you earn that win sometimes.
I think about it as leveling up when people beat me. Like when I first I'm fighting somebody and they're relatively new, they're fighting level 1 Malark. You know, level 1 Malark still has good basics. He still has good stuff, but like his footwork isn't as acrobatic.
I tend to be very, my footwork is pretty flat on the ground for level 1. And my reactions is about 8 times slower.
And then if you start to beat me consistently at level 1, I'm going to crank it up to level 2. Start to beat, and then I'm trying a little bit more now. Okay, we got some more movement. We got some more of the little. We're throwing some feints in there. Oh yeah, tricking it up. And then and then eventually, all people who stick around get to level 3, which is this is how I fight. I'm trying to win. You are trying to win. We both have the basics down. We both know what we're doing.
Let's do this.
Yeah. And so, but early on, and especially if you're thinking about somebody like Frederick, right? He's got this tiny country. Again, when we were talking about per capita, he's got more soldiers than most other countries, but he's also got a small country that's surrounded by aggression. He can't just be throwing people's lives away.
Yeah.
They don't come back quick enough. We have like a 15-year gestation period before we're useful soldiers, like
minimum.
Minimum.
Per capita, he's got like 1 troop for every 30 civilians, while Britain has 1 for every like 150. But Britain also has like 100 times the men that he has.
Right.
It does not matter when the army is still 3 times bigger.
So, and even if you've got the large army, you don't want to squander your soldiers because if size,
because then you won't have the large army anymore.
Right. You're just giving away your advantage. Like, that's dumb. So you want to save the blood for, again, these 2 reasons. 1, it'll endear your soldiers to you, especially in something like Bellegarth. Again, people like winning more than like losing, and so just like ordering blind charges for no reason. Like, people are like, there's 15 minutes left of this game, and we have to sit it out because I guess we just charged prematurely. So it's a matter of also making sure people have fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then it's also a matter of conserving your energy, conserving that economy of force, so that when the time comes for that big battle, when the time comes for that game-deciding little match on the board, because this happens in 40K too. Like, if you're just sitting there throwing away your lives, even for your Tyrannid and Orc players, just because you play a Horde army does not mean that all of your troops are expendable.
Yeah.
Because if you just bleed away, especially with orcs, like, their whole power is in their numbers. They, like the Psychers, for instance, draw a lot of power from just the number of orcs around. If you're diminishing that constantly, and not because you're going to lose people, obviously, but losing them needlessly, without a plan, without a follow through, without a reason for it, that's kind of what Fred's talking about.
Yeah, if you're losing 3 people when you only need to be losing 1, then you're doing it wrong.
Because then when you have another fight later on against another unit,
you're short 2 people that would have been helpful.
Exactly. So economy of force. Sun Tzu talked about it. Machiavelli talked about it. Fred talked about it. I'm fairly sure Vegetius is going to talk about it.
We were going to talk about this on some level in every single book.
Because it is an important concept. And it's also important when you're doing your individual fighting, because as a person, as an individual fighter, if you go out and just go super hard, like just complete, like burn out all the energy you have within the first hour of fighting, what good are you going to be hour 7?
I mean, in that one, we just call it economy of motion. If I don't need to move more now, then I get to move more later. If I don't have to move more to land that shot, that's less chances for you to block, to change.
To counter, yeah, all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so economy of force is just, it's an important concept. We're going to keep drilling it because it's an important concept. The next thing Frederick talks about, and this particular point is going to come up in our battle rather heavily today, is being informed of everything. You need to know what is happening in your army. So if you are an orc player, so if we're talking about 40k and I'm an orc player, I want to know everything. I want to be informed of every new release that's coming out for the orcs, all the new rule changes, how the other things relate to it, any of the supplemental stuff like the Psychic Awakening. You want to be up on that because you need to know everything about your army in order to use it effectively. Now let's bring it down to the physical war gaming level. You've got a team. You're a general or a unit leader or whatever, and you've got your team. You want to know everything that's going on in your camp. You want to make sure your camp is safe. You want to make sure everybody's squared away. You want to know everything that's going on in the field. Are people injured? Are people well fed? Are they well rested? Are they doing their jobs? Are they wanting to be a part of your unit? Like, knowing these things is important, but you as an individual can only do so much. There's only so many hours in the day. And this is where your lieutenants come in handy.
Oh, yeah.
Making sure that you have solid people you can rely on to bring you the good information that you need.
And even on like running a field level, this is having other heralds that are there to back you up or do whatever you need to make sure you have enough people for weapon check, to know as best you can what big surprises the different units are going to have. We had a Chaos Wars one year that I was helping herald at, and I was not in charge for this one, but it was chaotic. There was, half the units were on this side and half the units were on this side, but that's through some negotiations. The biggest unit from side A swapped to side B. And suddenly it was like a quarter of the field against 3/4 of the field. And even beyond just the on-field, oh my God, I wish we had known this, or oh God, all of the heralds or marshals or whatever term you want to use were kind of losing their stuff at the same time, because suddenly we had a completely different field that we had to look after.
And the information changed. All the information changed.
And everything we had to do changed immediately.
And also being informed of everything means knowing what's going on in the kitchen. Like I said, with being informed about if your people are well fed, that also comes with making sure that your kitchen is well staffed and making sure that they have what they need.
And the dishes are cleaned.
And the dishes are cleaned. Also a very important thing about staying healthy and making sure that it's useful. So again, and again, especially as a tournament coordinator or an event coordinator, this is especially important. You need to know what's going on at every level, because even if it's not your fault, it's your fault.
Yeah, if you're running the event, if something, you will be blamed for it for years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's one of those things that'll be with your reputation. Yeah. And again, I've known people whose reputations were somewhat tarnished because something else went wrong. Somebody in their command structure did something wrong. They were not informed of it, and then later on, they were held responsible for it. And because they're the leader,
it's their job.
The buck stops here. So, because you know that you're going to be blamed for everything, you might as well be informed about everything. The next point here is kind of the opposite. So when we're talking about disassembling and disassembling your emotions, dissembling yourself and appearing tranquil. And again, this is a matter of like appearing confident and making sure your enemy doesn't know you're frazzled. But on the other side, you want to make sure that you're friendly to your soldiers. You want to make sure that they like you. The best generals in history do tours regularly around wherever encampment their troops are at and just say, hey, how are you? What's going on? Like, I know I'm the guy at the very top, but I thought I'd come and eat dinner with you guys if that's okay.
Look at MacArthur.
Yeah.
All the time.
He was wildly popular with his soldiers for that sort of thing. A lot of the Civil War generals who were more popular did the same thing. They were men of the people. And this is something you want to do if you want to be an effective soldier. Don't maintain yourself at an arm's distance from your people. If you have members of your team, like newbies or whatever, you want to make sure that they feel included. You want to make sure they feel listened to, and that they're a part of the army, because they're going to stick around at that point. You want to ask after their well-being. Because a soldier that like I've said, is well rested, well fed, and well equipped is going to be a far more effective fighting force. And then the other part of this is praising good action. If you're seeing people doing the right thing, make sure that everybody knows about it. Call that person out and be like, so-and-so did the right thing, because that encourages the thing in the future.
When I was still a realm leader, there was a couple things I did along these lines to keep it going. One was if we had a good, clean day, everyone is enjoying themselves, having fun, I would point that out after practice. Go on to Facebook, hey, good job, guys. The field was really clean. The attitude was great. And everyone was just like, yeah, it was. And it built up a nice thing. And then you also just keep an eye on people who are working, people who are doing things, and not necessarily your leaders, but, Yui or Grizz or Orn or Kaji I've done it for, or, someone whose attitude wasn't good but has become good, or someone who is always there to herald, who is always there to help clean up afterwards.
Right.
And, I'd be like, hey, everybody, let's pay attention to how good of an attitude Red has had lately and how hard he's been working to be a better fighter. We see you, we notice you, everyone raise your glass. And for whatever reason, people took the raise your glass picture really seriously, and we were getting selfies of people
I know,
toasting them. I loved it.
I loved it. No, this is amazing because, like you say, it encourages more people to do that. It highlights the action, so that individual is going to do it more often, and other people see that and they go, "Oh, I can get praised for doing that sort of thing."
They wanted the glass raised for them, like literally.
Yeah.
I watched people compete for this, and then I watched people be like, "What, I'm doing good," and they were just on cloud 9 for the next 3 practices.
Scientifically, humans do better if they receive praise. Human, like when they've done studies comparing, like that really hard criticism style versus like a praise, and you can we're not talking about like never saying what somebody's doing wrong. We're never talking about like constructive criticism is still a thing, but do a compliment sandwich.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah. Scientifically speaking, it is more effective at managing people. And so especially when you're dealing with a very stressful situation, even on a fake battlefield, make sure that these people are feeling good about you. Remember talking about endearing your soldiers? If you're praising them for their good actions, they're like, man, General's all right. I could serve him. He's all right.
When I was in high school, I had someone ask me to review their portfolio for them. And I took it really seriously, and I took serious notes, and I had sticky notes that I put next to the things being like, this needs work. And I tried to be very clinical about it. Because that's what they asked for, and that's what they thought they wanted. And also, I was probably kind of mean because I was 16.
And we're all mean at 16.
And I tried to take it real seriously of this needs work. This part's wrong. And I did not say enough nice stuff. And I literally ruined my friendship with that person.
Ugh.
I didn't mean to.
Right.
But so, I got asked for an art critique this morning. And I went, oh, this is really good.
Yeah.
I really like this, but the waist looks wrong. And they went, oh, you're right. And it turned out way better. And they were affectionate about the fact that I critiqued them on that, as opposed to me if I had just been like, that's wrong.
Right. Well, again, this management style that I've heard about and experienced is this idea of the compliment sandwich, where you say that something they're doing well, and then you give the critique, the positive or the constructive criticism, and then you point out something else that they're doing well, or a way that that they can reach this point. Because the idea is about bringing them up. Leading is not about agitating your people. Leading is not about being the meanest guy in the room. Leading is about making your people better.
Also, a tip here. If you make that mistake, if you're a little harsher than you intended, because it's so easy to do with any kind of criticism, point out when you have done the same thing. Because if you are able to critique a mistake, that means you have probably made that mistake yourself. And again, an art one, because they're like, what do you think of this? And I'm like, well, that looks like not what you're trying to make it do. It kind of looks like a different body part that I don't think is what you were intending there. But it's okay. Look at this picture I did. It's even worse on that front.
Right.
And it turned from kind of mean without meaning to be mean to, yep, that looks like that, all right.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm. So humbling yourself, like you
Mhm.
say, is a good thing too.
it relates to them.
Frederick also recommends to grant small requests. So if your soldiers are like, hey, we'd like to, I don't know, get
Sleep in
together,
an extra hour.
sleep in an extra hour. If it's not absolutely critical, especially in something like Belagarth, if everybody's like, guys, we went really hard today and we want to get up a little bit later tomorrow, that's a small request.
Mm-hmm.
That's a small thing to grant people, a little bit of extra sleep. Let them have it, and it's something that will endear them to you. You don't have to be, pardon my phrasing, a hard ass in order to get respect. You don't have to be mean and really demanding of people in order to get them to do the right thing. You have to be. There's times for it. Frederick even says there are times when you have to punish. Deserters. If you've got spies, if you've got people who are falling asleep on guard duty or something like that, there are things that need to be punished.
That's bad.
But if people are doing the right thing, be good to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not hard.
No. And on this same idea, Frederick says to encourage intelligent officers to express their sentiments candidly. Make sure that the people who are in your organization, whether it's your realm, your unit, or your small gaming group or whatever, make sure you're listening to ideas. I consider myself a pretty smart guy. I consider myself fairly well read on matters political and military. That being said, I don't know everything. I know I don't know everything. There are people who know more about a particular subject or have a different perspective than I do that may be more accurate. And so I'm hamstringing myself if I don't listen to people who have other opinions.
Just in this podcast, when I first started, I was very purposely not learning about the episode's battles at the very beginning because I thought that it would be better that I could be there to ask questions and do more of a kind of education setup.
Sure.
But when we tried it the other way, where we both knew stuff, even though you had researched it more, I'd pop up with, oh, hey, but what about this thing?
Mm-hmm.
The just little out of the way flavor fact in my case is
Things
more
I
soft.
wouldn't necessarily consider, but that really added to the argument or really added to the perspective. Yeah. No, I love it. And you can only get this by encouraging this. If you shut people down, if you just pull the I'm in charge and my way goes card,
You're not going to be in charge for very long, honestly.
you're not going to be in charge for very long. You had mentioned a time that this went wrong for you at a Chaos Wars.
I had to run a field a couple years ago, and it went, every field goes sideways.
Right.
Anytime you're running banner and there's big games and stuff like that. And my game had a really obvious breaking point in retrospect because this was during the period where people were like, we'll do 3 teams.
Mm.
And I thought, like, okay, well, the problem with 3 teams is 2 teams will just beat up on 1.
Yep.
So I'll set up that the winner of whoever started the day or whoever won the day before starts at disadvantage.
Mm.
So if one team keeps winning, it'll hopefully change it up,
Balance it out. Yeah.
It didn't work because people just had too much. There was too much on one side of that team's gonna go.
We got to get them. Just like a blood feud develops.
And this is not me giving my players hell. I did not plan for this. And I was so worried about being hesitant that I became very hard line in the sand. And when people would try to talk to me about problems, I wasn't always the best at being receptive. Partly because I knew that everything was going wrong and my brain was overloading, being like, oh my God, too much information. And there is points. When people are talking to you in the middle of a battle, you have to be like, okay, you need to go.
Right, there's a time and place, absolutely. In the middle of the battle is not necessarily the time to change the plan.
But the next, after the battles, while talking about stuff for the next day, I needed to be better about, whoops, that didn't work. Let's talk about what you think would fix it. Because it turns out that if you talk with people on that, they tend to be very even. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily want an overwhelming advantage. They just want a shot.
Right, they just want to have it be a fair field.
But this is also, I had just been knighted. This was the first time that I had
authority.
Not even that. This is the first time I was running a field. It wasn't even so much I have authority. It's, oh my God, I have responsibility.
Sure, that duty thing.
And a national level responsibility as opposed to I'm doing something at my realm. That I was very comfortable with that by that point.
Sure.
So I was trying to prove I could fit the big boy boots, and I showed how big the big boy boots were still on me. And I learned a lot.
Sure.
I felt real bad about that event for a couple years, honestly, and I still do because I have guilt complex of a Catholic. But I have largely gotten over it, and I have learned so many lessons, and I can teach other people the lessons on it. And I'm just like, okay, don't do what I did.
Right.
And that's when, like, when I was able to pass that on, it was a lot easier. So,
And again, Thumbs illustrates this really good point. If you've got people who are trying to talk to you, who know what they're doing. Again, there are, I often hear this, the whole thing, there's no stupid ideas. There
there
stupid
absolutely
ideas.
are.
But, a lot of people, their ideas can be tempered. Even if the raw idea that comes to you isn't necessarily tenable, it might give you the perspective to adjust your own idea to make it more workable.
Mm-hmm.
So again, and humans are supposed to be a collective species. We're supposed to work together. And so this is a really good, especially somebody like Frederick. I like the fact that even Frederick, as brilliant as he was, and as self-centered as he was, even he says, you got to listen to your officers. You got to listen to your guys who know what they're talking about. Because if you don't, you're doing so at your own peril.
I mean, we can even take this to his wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Who we've talked about before, and I look for any excuse to talk about her, because as we've said, she's amazing.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth Christine.
He
amazing.
knew his weaknesses, and it was everything Elizabeth Christine was good at, so he encouraged her to play with that area, to run the court, to make sure that all the diplomatic stuff was done for him.
And he trusted her to do it.
Yeah.
And listened to her when she was able to provide some feedback on maybe what he was doing wrong. So it's important. It's very important to make sure that you're listening to people. That's the reason you have them, So on the same idea of listening to people and formulating this plan, you want to do the hard work beforehand. The hard work is the mental work. You want to make sure that you have not only thought out your plan, but you've thought out 3 or 4 contingencies to said plan. And you know exactly every single level of that plan. This is Frederick level thinking, right? But that's not enough. Just having a plan isn't enough to win the battle or isn't enough to carry the day, because you have to have the industry to see it through. I'll give you an example. This podcast starts off as a plan. At the beginning of the week, we talk about what section or at the beginning of the week or the 2-week cycle that we're on, we talk about what section of the book we're going to be studying. And then we plan to do a podcast about it in about a week. That plan is all good and fine, but there's a lot of work that goes into it too. We have to have the industry to then say, read said book.
Yeah.
We have to have the industry for, like in my case, for instance, when I'm doing this podcast, I read the book the first time, just one pass through. Then I read it again while taking my notes. And these are just like freehand notes, little like the quotes or the ideas that I like. They're not necessarily organized. It's just the things that I liked in the chapter that I want to talk about. And then I might go through the book again, but at this point I'm going through my notes and I'm organizing them and I'm formulating where they're going to be at in my argument, in my story that I'm telling, while also kind of looking at what they relate to in the book, making sure I've got the spirit of what Frederick was trying to say right. And then at that point we finalize the notes. So that's a lot of work. That's several days. It's a week worth of work that if I don't have the industry to do, and if Thumbs doesn't have the industry to do, this podcast doesn't happen.
Yeah, and my side tends to be a lot easier because you tend to form the framework of the episode. But still, if I'm not reading the book, if I'm not sitting thinking about it, if I'm not remembering good stories from Belagarth or places that I made mistakes,
right,
I am not going to give as good of a performance. I'm not going to give as good of a show. And it's all of us have to do the full effort.
We have a role. We all have roles to play. Thumbs has a different role with this show than I have. A lieutenant has a different role on a battlefield than a general has. Neither of them are more important or less important than the other one when you really look at it. Everybody has to
backup singer.
Everybody has to fulfill their role in order for the army to function correctly. It was one of the things I recognized when I was in the army itself. You're a part of one big machine. Every single job contributes to the overall war effort. It doesn't matter if you're a paper pusher or you look at photographs and read books like I did as an intelligence guy, or if you're on the front lines fighting. Everybody is serving a role. I would like you to find one person in the army that doesn't think that the cook isn't probably the most important person in the unit. Doesn't do any fighting, but everybody loves Cookie. I'm just saying. So these roles, and this mental work comes from everybody. Again, the mental work done by a general beforehand is going to be different than the mental work done by a lieutenant. It's going to be different than a sergeant. I'm using these different ranking structures, but the idea is do the hard work before. Make your plan, make your contingencies, but then also have the industry to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Check up on your lieutenants, make sure they're following through. And that's the way the things get done.
And as much as we warned about having lieutenants so you don't burn out, check up on your lieutenants so they don't burn out.
That's a weak part in the chain. You want to be aware of that, be informed of everything, right?
Middle management is rough.
It is. It is. So on this last idea of these plans, skepticism is the mother of security and overconfidence is the mother of defeat. So you want to be constantly looking at what you have. So if I've got this plan, right? And I'm like, okay, got this plan to meet the enemy. I also want to keep checking to make sure that the conditions in which that plan was set still exist. If I've got a plan to hit my enemy's line here, I want to make sure that that line is still where it was and that the flanking elements still where they were when I made that plan. Because if those things have shifted, if the battlefield has changed significantly, the plan needs to change too.
The exact Persian that I was making fun of earlier, whose name we cannot remember, had all set up. He had lost his previous battle with Alexander. He was pretty sure he was going to have it right. And he was real set for what Alexander was doing. But Alexander changed up the plan. And he shifted some soldiers, some cavalry to the left. And he went, oh no, we can't have that. And sent some of his cavalry to the left. So Alexander sent just a few more of his cavalry to the left. And this just went back on until there's like this little mini cavalry battle going on the side, until it got to the point that Alexander's like, okay, wait for like 3 more horses. Okay, go.
And we've got the point. So like what Thumbs is saying here exactly, because this other commander wasn't being skeptical of the situation, because he was just taking it as a dry read and saying, okay, this is how I react because Alexander, and not being skeptical of the plan, he got played.
Yeah.
He got played. And this overconfidence thing is also how you get played. If you go into a battle and you think, I am going to win this, you will perform less than a person who is desperate. Straight up.
Oh, you won't try as hard. I got this. It's fine. Whatever.
And I have personally suffered some pretty humiliating defeats against opponents that I quote unquote should have won against because
hardest fights for me is the ones that I think I should be winning. That I know my talent level enough to know I should be able to beat these people. I'm not even necessarily wrong. I mean, a lot of times I'm wrong. That's why I tried to get rid of that viewpoint anyways.
But if they're able to play to that pride.
And if I'm so in because if I make a mistake at that point, it's such a bigger deal. Oh man, I should have made the mistake. I should be winning this fight.
Right.
And then you have to get past that to do another thing. And you have like 4 extra levels of
you're playing head games on yourself.
Mental idiocy to win.
So don't be overconfident. Make sure that you are skeptical of all of your plans and all of your abilities. If you think that your sword style is set and you never practice the basics, I guarantee you've gotten rusty in some way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I feel so rusty right now. That's not the same thing. But the moment you said rusty, my body just cried.
And I know I keep telling y'all that I'm going to get this 12-shot video out to you, and it's been delayed at this point because, for a good reason, it's a good reason, I'm going to do it with a lightsaber because it shows up better.
That's going to be so cool.
And I think I said that on the last show, but I'm saying it again. I haven't forgotten about it. It's coming, but my lightsaber is also coming. So when it gets here, you're going to have a video, I guarantee you. So these are the talents of a general. Basically, the idea is that you want to maintain a poker face while constantly examining the situation, constantly trying to find the way to achieve an advantage. You want to be informed of everything and preserve the lives of your soldiers so that you have the economy of force, that you can really deliver the knockout punch when you need to. You want to be good with your soldiers. You want to encourage them, encourage their good ideas, and relate to them in a way that makes you endearing to them, that makes you want to be followed. And finally, you want to make sure you do the hard work beforehand and then examine it again, because as we've said before, every plan fails when it first meets the enemy. And those are the talents of a general.
It's very important.
It's very important. And in the next section, we're going to be talking about how such a general uses ruses and stratagems to win the day. A general should never be predictable, which is why this section on ruses and stratagems is so important. Because when you come into something, you want to make sure that your opponent doesn't know what you're going to do. And this first section, in the book, it's called Need to Know. The U.S. military refers to this concept as operational security. I'm going to tell you a story. I've been watching through the Clone Wars for the first time, and I finally got over the animation style. And one of the things I noticed in the Clone Wars is at the beginning of any of the large conflicts, the Jedi get together and they hold just a big powwow. And they invite, all of the line troopers that are walking by and, any clone trooper that might be in the room. And, Senator Palpatine is in on the call too. And, here's some other senators and stuff. And they're all just talking about every single aspect of the plan. And then at one point, Yoda's sitting there and he's like, "Oh, he's ahead of us. The enemy appears to be." Wow, that's a terrible Yoda impression.
Actually, that was pretty good.
And I'm sitting there being like, well, no, duh. You're telling everybody, including your aunt, about what the plan is. That's the exact opposite. Of course, Palpatine knows. He's right there in the room. And once they realize that, of course, the enemy seems to have this foresight, they don't change what they're doing. They just continue to have these large meetings and include everybody in the conversation. No. You have to have operational security. This lieutenant who is in charge of this thing, that is what they know about. You do not tell them what Lieutenant B is doing, because Lieutenant B's job is Lieutenant B's job. You want Lieutenant A to only know what Lieutenant A is supposed to do. And then Lieutenant B is informed about Lieutenant B's job, not about anybody else's. This does two things. One, it doesn't cloud people's head.
Too many things to think about.
Too many things to think about. Once everything starts going, if you're thinking about what everybody else is doing when you're in the thick of the fight, you're going to be too distracted. And things are going to go awry, and you're going to step up on your own brain. A soldier needs to be focused on their objective. They need to be moving forward always. And trying to achieve whatever it is, taking that hill, And so if they're concerned about everybody else's hill, they're going to be less effective. So for one thing, this is a matter of concentrating that effort into one place. On the other thing, spies are everywhere. And what we do is no exception. I know most 40K players, their new list builds, we play them pretty close to the chest.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want to know what people, for people to know what we have necessarily before we come to the table.
I'm going to bring 3 Titans. Now I can just do some anti-vehicle weapon right there.
More las cannons. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So you don't want your opponent to know what you're bringing, obviously, on that end. But it's also true in something like Belagarth. Even if people are not like, they don't sit there and they're like, I am a spy. I work for so-and-so. That's not the level of spies that usually exist in Belagarth. What we have are gossips.
You have a spying story that you have been telling me for 10 years now.
This would be a good spot for it.
This would be a great spot for it.
I think I've already told it on the show, but it's been a while, so I'm going to regale you again. My very first Chaos Wars, I was wandering around one night, and I saw this group of people who were clustered together conspiratorially. And as I approached, I recognized some of the voices as being members of the Gelf, as Thumbs is a member of.
This is far before my time.
His time. And at the time, the Gelf were allied with the Uruk-hai, who I was working with, and I overheard the Gelf talking about how they were going to betray the Uruk-hai the next day. Yes. And so I hustled on back to camp. And of course, they paid me no mind. I was just a person stumbling around in the dark.
Drunk, lanky 20-year-old.
Why pay attention to me? And so I hustle on back to my unit leader, Forkbeard, burst into his trailer, and I say, Forkbeard, the Gelf are planning on betraying you. And I revealed everything of what I had heard from the conversation. And the next day, where the Gelf were planning on the Uruk-hai, trusting them. And then the Gelf, the whole plan was that the Gelf were just going to hold back. The rest of the field was going to converge on the Uruk-hai, and the Gelf were just not going to support them, was the idea. And so what the Uruk-hai did was just bum rush the Gelf. Every single round. It was beautiful. round time.
I did not do that right, sorry.
We didn't choreograph it beforehand. It's fine. So this threw a wrench in the Gelf's plans. Obviously, everything still kind of worked out. The Uruk-hai did not take the banner, which was kind of the point of it.
Neither did the Gelf that year.
But neither did the Gelf. And part of it was because operational security. The no mind pain to the stumbling person in the dark turned into a major security flaw. And so this is kind of what I'm talking about. Like I told Thumbs, I could go on about operational security for so long because it's a very important concept of this need-to-know basis.
He can and has many times.
The cook should know about the cooking. The soldier should know what hill specifically they need to take. They don't necessarily need to know about each other's jobs.
Yeah.
You do. You're the general. But they just need to know what they need to accomplish. And so this is, again, It's a matter of focusing up your priorities and making sure that the information does not get where it doesn't need to be. And this point will be very well illustrated with our battle. I know I keep teasing at it, but this is a fun one.
Could it be now?
So, keeping everything need to know. You're making sure that the right people know the right things and you're not disseminating too much information. The next point is to change your methods. To make sure that you're keeping it fresh, you're bringing new ideas to the table or new ideas to the field when you're coming. And this isn't to say that you throw out your grab bag of good plans. For instance, the Gelf. They are, as we've discussed, fairly support weapon heavy. They've got a lot of big, long weapons, some pikes, some glaives, all that good stuff. They got a lot of archers. They got a long reach. They're very good straight ahead. They got a very good, as we were discussing with the phalanx idea, the Gelf are very good at fighting what is directly in front of them and crushing it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if the Gelf were to do this every single time, if they were to march at their opponent straight on every single time, do you think it would work? Though?
No, it doesn't. I know for a fact that it doesn't, because I've been there.
Yeah, actually, we talked about this back at the Stygia event. That
But
recently.
this has come up about 6 times. It turns out when we haven't been fighting much, we're telling the same stories repeatedly.
Yeah, we'll get you. Like I said, I was excited to have the first game in here because I finally had something new to talk about. So what the Gelf could do instead, because they know that attacking straight on is their strong point. They know that where their weapons are all pointed forward, that is where they are strongest. But instead of just marching straight at their target, they could maybe strafe left and then hit them straight on, or strafe right and then hit them straight on, or maybe pull back and then hit them straight on.
Yeah. Oh, they think they're running.
There's a lot of different ways that you can combine your favorite tactic or your favorite method with variety. You still end up doing the same thing. For instance, I tell people I throw 3 shots in Belagarth.
It's just a matter of how you throw them.
It's just a matter of the combination. It's a matter of the feints I throw beforehand. That's what changes. Is where I'm feinting to, because that if I'm mixing that up, I don't become predictable. But I still only land on the same 3 parts of the body generally.
Yeah, I know. I can feel the parts of the body while you say those words.
Is your kidney aching? Just
a little bit. And the back from where you used to do the scorpion wrap all the time.
I can't do that one no more.
I know, but it's just built in at this point.
Just the fear of the scorpion. So change your methods. You want to make sure that you're keeping it fresh. Again, don't throw out the things that work, but make sure that you're doing them in different ways so that you don't become predictable. That's what you're trying to avoid here, is predictability. So the next point that Frederick makes is to feign the contrary of your objectives. And we were kind of talking about this just now with the idea of body feints. So if I'm fighting against thumbs and I want to get this kidney wrap that I'm talking about, that's my bread and butter shot.
Everyone does against me. It's the lefty's bane.
Well, I'm also a lefty.
I know, but you fight lefties like you're a left, or like...
I do. I stand weird when I fight lefties because I'm like, I'm just going to fight you like a righty because it confuses people. But the idea is, so if I want that kidney, the last thing I need to do is position my body in such a way that it's obvious that I'm going to go for a kidney shot, because everybody knows, for one thing, everybody knows who's been fighting me for any length of time knows that I like kidney wraps. So for one thing, that's already in their head. So if I'm sitting there and I brace myself in such a way that it's like I'm about to throw a kidney wrap, what are they going to do?
They're going to rep for that kidney wrap. There is a point where I perfected the C shot.
Mm-hmm.
I could throw it like no one's business, and it doesn't work in Stygia anymore.
Nope.
Even people who weren't there back then, because they have learned from the people who were.
For sure. But in the same thing, I always end up throwing the kidney wrap, but it's after I feint high for the shoulder.
Yep.
Or I feint to the other side for the leg, or I try to go for a stab and then redirect or something. I still end up going for the shot that I want, but I get my opponent out of position beforehand because I'm feigning the contrary to my objectives. Right? One of my other favorite tricks is just to stare somewhere that I don't actually intend on hitting. So if I'm squaring up against thumbs and I want my kidney wrap, I might just stare at that shoulder. Just look at it all.
Hungry for it.
Looking salivating like at it. And then, I watch his guard start to creep up to protect that shoulder subconscious like, because he can see, wham!
And it only takes like a 2-inch shift of the guard. Like it does not take much. Once that body weight has shifted just a bit too far, it's over. You're not recovering.
So if you think about this in a larger sense of like a large field, so a physical wargaming large field, to send... So let's say you have some really fast people and you're like, okay, I know you can reposition pretty good. I want you to fake like you're hitting the left really hard. Just run at them super hard. And then when they start to square up and, holler to everybody to watch that flank, I want you to pull back and circle around to the other side. You wouldn't believe how well that works.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Because the people are still there, especially if you have somebody to center it. Like if there's a few of them that run up and they're harrying, hey, keeping that attention. And then you pull a redirect.
There have been so many times where I shift basically looking like I'm going for a hard flank, but I'm not actually trying to start a fight. I am just trying to cause enough attention.
Right.
Oh, you gotta watch thumbs over there. And I'm like, you really don't, but sure. Yes, please watch me.
The real action's going on over there, but I am feigning contrary to our objectives.
Apparently, you should pay more attention to me than Turkey, and you're absolutely wrong on that front. But man,
and when you go up to something larger like intellectual wargaming, it's kind of the same idea. If you send a smaller, maybe quicker unit that can redirect after something that you're not necessarily wanting, it might provoke your opponent into committing more resources there than they need to. And then when you make your real move against your real objective, your opponent has less to defend with.
Send your biker boys over there and send your... Oh, I forgot what the Killican?
Killicans, yeah, that's
send your Killican to the big one. That's what you're actually after. And when they're like, oh, wait, oh, yep.
And that actually brings up our next point too, which is the idea of threatening multiple targets. So if you're looking at a fairly well-defended opponent who has a fairly spread out defense on anything, whether we're talking about physical, like one-on-one wargaming, or an intellectual, one of the best things you can do is then move yourself into position where you can hit several different things. So like put your sword in a way that you could maneuver toward several different shots, or put your unit in a way that you've got a couple of different options to move on the unit or units that you're against. Or the same thing on 40K, make sure that you move up and threaten multiple objectives or multiple soft targets. And what this will do is that your opponent will then consolidate their defenses on what they actually value. And then you hit something else. Like you're like, okay, I'm wanting to hit objective 1, 2, and 3. My opponent has pulled back all of their forces to 2 and 3, so I'm going to go after 1 because it's available to me now. And you still gain a foothold. It's still an objective that you had, but you're doing less work for it.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just marching directly at 1 and being like, oh, I'm going at objective 1, and then they can be like, okay, slide people over to objective 1, obviously.
Better freaking protect for that. Yeah.
They can prepare for it. But if you're threatening 3 of them, and you're like, and then they're like, oh, I don't know, but I really need to preserve these 2, it helps out. It can clear the field for you. The next tactic is one that Frederick doesn't refer to it this way, but Thumbs and I have taken to referring to it as the Mongolian retreat, which is this false retreat of being like, oh no, we're going to run away. We're overwhelmed.
Oh,
ambush.
Look at those scary knights. Oh, right. There's 20,000 of us with bows.
Mm-hmm. But this idea of if your opponent is in a strong position, drawing them out of it, feigning this weakness and being like, oh, we're gonna have a disorderly route. Very few people can resist pursuing a disorderly route.
No, it's the way that most armies collapsed if one part started routing. I mentioned this earlier today, even.
Yep.
The Mongolians could fake that like nobody's business.
And if it's something like, it's something that, like wolf packing, it works really well for this. If you can do a Mongolian retreat and combine it with a wolf packing technique, gosh, you can just tear apart. You can really gain local superiority in numbers and just tear an army apart.
It's really a lot harder to do this with a dedicated wall because a dedicated wall requires more proper assembly. I'm not saying you can't do it. You're giving me the little nod that they can't see. But it does require definitely more prep for it.
No, absolutely. But like you say, anybody can do this. Anybody can kind of feign this idea. And it actually leads into our next idea of pretending fear if you want your enemy to attack. It's the same idea with the Mongolian retreat. You seem weak. You seem like, oh no. And you can do this, again, mind games. We're talking mind games. If I'm doing a game of Warhammer and my opponent moves towards something that, I don't necessarily care about. There's this unit over here that I sent out as a distraction. They're moving towards it. Maybe at that point, I might start to look concerned, right? I might be like, oh no, not those dudes. They're vital to my war effort. And then my opponent is like, oh yeah, and commits there and maybe bumbles into my ambush, or maybe opens up the line in a place that I needed elsewhere to get after my actual objective. And this it absolutely works. I saw Slag do it. I know we talked about it on this show, but Slag was a guy who used to live here in Stygia. And he perfected this technique of looking just dog tired. Like he'd have his shield super sagged and his shoulders super sagged. Like, I mean, the
I
dude,
love this technique.
he looked like he hadn't slept in like 3 days and hadn't eaten in about the same.
And it's like, so it's possible he hadn't.
It was, yeah. And then all of a sudden he'd just spring into action. Suddenly his eyes would light up. His guard was there. Like right as somebody entered the danger zone, they suddenly realized that it wasn't his danger zone, it was theirs. And like, he'd just be on them. And this was coming from this feigned thing that's like, oh no. Birds will use it to lead people away or predators away from their nests. Like, oh, my broken wing, look at me.
Oh, how terrible. Even on a one-on-one combat thing, I'll use it by leaving my shoulder open on, I'm left-handed fighting someone that's right-handed, so sword is on sword side. And oh no, look, my shoulder is it's showing right there. Oh, it would be so bad if I lost that.
And then when they
it
go
would
for
be
the cross,
it would be bad if I lost that. But
you're ready for it.
They go for the cross, and all I have to do, because it just the way things are set up, I just have to shift like 4 degrees, like almost nothing, and suddenly that shot's not landing, and their entire side, and I am moving again. I just can't stop tonight.
He's just wiggling everywhere.
Their entire side is just open.
It's delicious. That's the word of the night, delicious. So yeah, this pretending fear, pretending weakness, when you're not actually weak, when you're not actually fearful, can draw your enemy into a state of overconfidence. And if you recall from the last section, overconfidence, no bueno.
No bueno.
It's not a place you want to be. On the opposite, we're talking about bluffing, pretending strength if you don't want to fight. Thumbs and I have talked about this before, where we'll go out and just like control a side of a line for a few seconds just by standing there. Just by having the presence, having the confidence of being like, or either looking, like Thumbs' technique is to go up and look bored. He'll just go up and be like, whatever, I got this. Which will, of course, make them go, oh man, he doesn't look concerned
I know
at
what
all.
I'm doing. This is fine. It doesn't work if they know me too well, but if they don't,
then it's a good bluff. Or what I do is I'll go over and I'll thrust my head forward. And I'll have my chest out, and I'll make sure that I'm grinning like a fool. And they're like, man, I don't want to tangle with this crazy dude. Like,
you're going
no
the small
way.
yappy dog route of this. Of like, let's do this.
I'm going the pressure route.
Oh, really? You?
Now, on the inside, of course, Thumbs and I are both sitting there going, please don't call my bluff.
God, there's like 6 of you.
I can take 1, maybe 2 of you, but if you rush me, you will take me. But again, in this particular case, all we're trying to buy is a few seconds. We're trying to buy a few seconds to a minute for the other people on our team to finish up what they're doing and then come help us. That's that local superiority in numbers concept again. And this also works in something like 40K. You want to be pretending strength, again, to compensate for your weakness. The problem is, what if they call your bluff?
You better have some backup.
It's called a contingency. Frederick recommends that you make sure that, again, like we were talking about in the camp section, if you either last chapter or the chapter before, if you've got a camp, you want to make sure that you've got a couple of backup camps that you can move to pretty easily. If you're going to go with this pretend strength thing, if you're going to go and puff out your chest and not have anything to follow through, you better have a fallback plan. Because if you do this thing that Thumbs and I are talking about, you go out and you challenge an entire side, and you're standing with your back to the edge of the world, eventually they're going to wise up to the fact.
Go terribly for you.
Yeah, and then you dead. Whereas, like normally, what Thumbs and I'll do is we'll go out there, we'll bluff, and then when they do eventually call it, because they'll eventually be like, wait a minute, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, yeah, we got this, guys. Let's go. And so at that point, we leave. We're like, okay, I'm going to go rejoin the main line. I'm going to fall back to where everybody else is at. And we skedaddle out of there because the whole point of it wasn't to engage the side. It was to delay them. And now that has failed, it is foolhardy to stand there and just die.
What I always think of is the animated Aladdin movie. The monkey gets the sword. And they're like, he's got a sword. You idiot. We all have swords. And it's like, whoop, time to go. Like,
but it was just a few seconds,
yeah,
right?
Just got him the moment long enough that Aladdin could escape there.
Few seconds. That can be all that you need. And so like what Frederick is saying with his army, if they call his bluff, he puts up forth the very good defense, and then night comes and, he X's out to one of these fallback points that he has. But with what we do, we don't necessarily have that option. But again, make sure that if you're bluffing, you have a way to get out of it, because otherwise you're just dead at that point. The last point that we want to make, and use ruses and stratagems, and I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about spies. And particularly in this case, I know we've talked a lot about turning your friends into a spy network and all that sort of thing. You can go back and look at Using Spies by Sun Tzu if you want a really detailed workup of this. But what he really touches on here is the idea of double agents. Identifying the enemy's agents and purposefully feeding them misinformation. And so for us, again, not many people in Belagarth employ actual spies, as far as I know. Like, it's all word of mouth. But intentionally...
I'll hire you if you do, just for curiosity.
We have to talk.
I'll hire you anyways. You know that.
But the idea is, remember, gossips. Gossips are double agents, if you want to think about it, in something like Belagarth or 40K. People who just freely share information with other people. These are people that can be used to your advantage too. If your army is coming in really strong, let's say that you guys are going for the title this year or the banner. You guys really want it, but you don't want people to necessarily take you seriously. Maybe go up to a few of these gossips and be like, man, I don't know about our team this year. Like,
we're not there.
We're not there. We're not vibing. Like, whatever the case may be. And then that gossip is going to go to every other gossip and say, oh, did you hear about Malark and Thumb's team? They're not vibing. They're not
terrible.
doing really well. Then everybody who squares up against us is like, oh, we got an easy win here. No reason to bring the pain. And then we brought
the pain.
That pain. There's a reason we're not wrestlers, guys. We're sorry.
We're not intimidating people. Our bluffs are really just based off the fact that we're tall.
And armored.
Armored.
That's typically why I'm intimidated, is because I'm wearing the armor that you made for me, and it makes me look like some sort of...
You wanted to look like a Space Marine, man.
I look like a Dark Lord Space Marine. It's delicious. And so, again, you're relying on that. But this double agents thing, this is a good way to get in people's heads. Or, on the other hand, making up for some sort of weakness. Doing the opposite thing and be like, man, our team is really on this year. We're really, you got to watch out for us. When really you're like, oh, you're kind of shaky. Like, maybe you have a new member or whatever. And it's like the vibe is off. But like, you don't want everybody else to know that. So you spread the information that you guys are top tier. And so maybe people will wig themselves out, get in their own heads, be like, oh man, Thumbs and Malark's team are against them. There's no way we're going to win.
I don't want that.
And they've already lost. They've already lost against an inferior team that they didn't know because of misinformation through double agents. So, a lot of this information is going to come back for us. We've talked about these ruses and stratagems, and a lot of this stems, being immune to ruses and stratagems stems from an idea of operational security. You want to make sure that you're changing your methods. And when you're developing your methods and developing your tactics, you also want to feign the contrary of what you want. Sometimes by threatening multiple targets, sometimes by performing something called a Mongolian retreat. Oftentimes you'll pretend fear when you want your enemy to actually attack you, or you might bluff and pretend strength when you really don't, which in case you need a contingency. But in all cases, double agents help you spread the misinformation that makes your ruses and stratagems even more successful. And all of this information kind of comes together. We're going to bring it all together now in talking about our battle for the day, which was the Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1961.
So of all things, I learned about the Bay of Pigs from a really bad, low-budget black and white movie from the 60s.
Yeah?
Which it must have come out just after the Bay of Pigs. And it's just called Bay of Pigs.
Sure.
But they clearly could only afford 10 people for the entire movie.
Oh, no.
So it's just mostly 3 people running through a derelict airfield and calling it the Bay of Pigs. So it was real fun to actually learn. And I knew more than what that was after I figured out what it, learned some stuff. But it was really interesting to realize that this is so much bigger. I keep, because my first introduction was this terrible low budget 10-person movie, I automatically associated small thing. This is a 1,000-person battle that we don't like to talk about.
That had international implications.
Huge international. This is height of the Cold War stuff.
Yep. So we're going to dive right in. And again, some of our listeners, this is one of the first battles we've done. I know we've covered World War II before, and I guess there's a possibility that somebody's listening to us that's been in World War II, which case...
Probably not.
I salute your service. But this is the first battle we've talked about that it's fairly likely that some of our listeners may have actually been alive for the events that we're talking about. We're going to be covering them from a scholarly, historical perspective, what we could ascertain from online articles, documentaries, and books on the subject. Neither Thumbs or I were alive for this particular thing. And so
we're not historians.
Well, I am.
Fair enough.
And so our perspective is going to be different. And so it's not a matter of perspectives are never agreeing or disagreeing. It's just different ideas. So bearing that in mind and understanding that, again, this is not something that we directly experienced, we're going to talk about this Bay of Pigs invasion real quick. So it happened, the time period we're talking about is the 17th through the 20th of April, 1961. The powers at play here were Cuba, under the command of Castro, and USA, which was being led by Kennedy at the time. You also have the Brigade 2506, but we're going to get into that a little bit later.
And we have the Soviet Union, not directly involved, but big enough power players that we can't not mention them.
They were definitely heavily involved in this particular conflict, and in the surrounding circumstances that precipitated the conflict too. The numbers were not very large. In terms of the forces that we have normally been talking about, the numbers are actually pretty small. On the side of the USA, you had about a total of 1,500 ground forces that consisted of expatriates from Cuba, people who had been pushed out by Castro's revolution, who were looking for a little counter-revolution of their own. On the other side, you had Cuba. And Cuba had 25,000 army personnel.
It's so many in comparison.
200,000 militia, and 9,000 armed police who were involved in this particular conflict. So that's a total of 234,000 troops. It was because, again, they were invading this nation with this small group. Now you might be asking,
like 200 to 1 advantage.
like, what was going on here? You just in the recent episode, you were talking about the U.S. wanting a 10 to 1 advantage. Why are they backing this play? We're going to go over that a little bit, like what led up to this situation. So in December of 1958, Castro takes over the country in a revolution from Batista. Now, Batista is significant because Batista had previously been in power as well and was very pro-U.S. Was letting U.S. companies operate within Cuba with little to no jurisdiction, like oversight. The mafia, Cuba was a huge place for the mafia to do their business offshores because of the climate that was being fostered, particularly by Batista and his regime. And
and this is like 20 years after Prohibition.
Right.
So rum running was Cuba was a huge part of rum running. Mm-hmm. They'd already had their feet in before this. And also Cuba is, it's not a small island, but it's not big.
Right.
When you're next to the United States,
90 miles off the coast from the United States. Yeah, I mean they have. There's long been this power struggle, and of course the interest of the United States in Cuba goes back to when we helped them free themselves from Spanish occupation and then put them under basically U.S. occupation right after that. And so there's been this history, and I encourage you to go and look at it. There was actually this really good documentary on Netflix that I checked out partially in preparation for this. That I highly recommend. That's on the Cuban Revolution and kind of the background of it.
And Cuba's one we don't really talk about. We're like, our neighbors are Mexico and Canada and Cuba.
Cuba's right there.
Right, 90 miles.
So Batista is overthrown in this revolution. And like most revolutions, it didn't have a clear direction when it was first coming out. Remember that you had communist elements in the Cuban Revolution, but you also had democratic elements. You also had very conservative elements. You also had fascists. I mean, like a revolution, anytime a revolution occurs, there are a lot of voices who contribute to the actual revolution occurring. After it happens, usually one party seizes power and then kind of solidifies things. Before this revolution occurred, though, Castro wasn't the biggest communist. Like in talks with the U.S., previous to this, I mean, he was bombastic toward the U.S., but he didn't necessarily support the idea of communism. Two other fellas within his movement, his brother Raul and Che Guevara, were definite communists.
They were big old communists.
Oh yeah, they talked about it often. They were very, very into the writings of Marx and Mao and the way that the Soviet apparatus worked. They were about communism, whereas Castro was more of an opportunist. He wanted the revolution, no doubt, but I don't think he necessarily had a clear vision of what it was going to be. Now, after the revolution, one of the first things he did, and granted this is a very communist move, was he nationalized business. He kicked the U.S. companies out and said, Cuban money is going to be for Cuba. Cuban products are going to be for Cuba. And if you want them, you can buy them at a fair price. America did not like this.
And there's a whole lot of stuff you can talk about that. There's very authoritarian errors of that. But also at the same time, Cuba was being taken a lot of advantage of.
Right. Right. And so we're not necessarily saying that Castro is good or bad. We're not necessarily saying that the U.S. is good or bad, but there were a lot of circumstances that kind of led into the way things transpired.
Yeah. There was no like, this man's... There's no Hitler in this story.
No. And now it depends on who you talk to, I imagine. But from our perspective, there's no Hitler in this story. So Castro nationalizes the business. This does not go over well with the U.S. They immediately begin making rumblings about intervention, possibly military intervention. And so Castro makes a smart political move at this point, and he reaches out to the other big dog in the park, the USSR. And with that involvement, of course, comes the KGB involvement and all that sort of thing. And in response, Eisenhower allocates $13 million to the CIA, which at this point is still a kind of a baby of an organization. Here, in our current day and age, the CIA is another one of those cornerstone institutions that's just taken for granted in America. It's
only about a decade old here, though.
Right. It was only formed in 1947 in response to efforts from the KGB. It was actually like a counter spy thing to begin with, to work against the efforts of the KGB in the world. And so $13 million to the CIA in order to get rid of Castro.
And you have to remember, this is also 1950s money. $13 million is a lot of money.
It's quite a bit of money. So there was a lot of different tactics they tried. Assassination. They tried, of course, doing things from internally, but Castro had started to crack down on political dissidents and had instituted a state media. And so the information and the message was controlled by Castro and his regime there in Cuba. And so the people heard what he wanted them to hear, which really played in well to kind of how this all shook out. So again, we're talking about Eisenhower. You students of history are going to go, well, wait a minute, 1961, that's Kennedy, not Eisenhower, right? So this plan is formulated under Eisenhower, and it includes air and naval support. The idea basically is that a small group or a moderately sized army of Cuban expats, people who were pushed out by Castro, would land, establish a beachhead, and then call for international aid. At this point, the United States would be like, oh gosh, these people are just being repressed by a communist government, and come in and intervene.
They need help.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they'd have the sympathy of the international community, was the whole idea.
This is a common tactic.
Yes, it was used in Nicaragua, in Colombia, all over Latin America.
And we should also say it's not just a common U.S. tactic. I mean, this is a common tactic throughout history.
The Romans used it, the Persians used it, the Chinese used it, the Russians used it. I mean, if you've been a successful empire, you have used this tactic. And so the training commences. This small group, Brigade 2506, remember I said I'd come back to that, is the official name that is given to this group of expats who are planning on, quote-unquote, invading Cuba. The Eisenhower administration doesn't end up acting on this, though. Of course, the international power politics are such that they don't quite have the provocation, aren't quite ready by the time that Eisenhower is out of office. Now, it was assumed at this time that Nixon was a shoo-in, that he was going to become the next president. And so they didn't involve Kennedy in any of these talks. Normally, if there's some sort of action like this going on, they're going to involve the other candidate in it and say, okay, this is
just in case.
This is what you might need to expect. At this time, again, Nixon was such a shoo-in in their minds that they didn't even bother to tell Kennedy about this plan.
The fun thing about this for me is TV is what brought it down. This is not directly related to the Bay of Pigs, but it is interesting, kind of fun history. But the reason Kennedy did so well is they did the first televised presidential debate. And Kennedy is a handsome, good-looking guy who answers things well. And Nixon was Richard Nixon.
He was a little sweaty.
And looked a little... Yeah. And...
cameras did not favor Nixon in the debate.
It cost him the presidency for a decade.
And so in this particular case, again, Kennedy comes into this blind. And he's basically walking into office. Eisenhower is walking out of office and says, oh, by the way, here's the invasion plan for Cuba. Have fun.
High five on their way.
And so Kennedy's just sitting there, I'm sure, just like, okay, well, this is fun. So his heart wasn't in it, though. Like his whole point, like a lot of Kennedy's thing, for all of his bluster and all of his bombastic speeches that he would occasionally give, Kennedy seemed to be motivated toward international cooperation. Kennedy seemed to be motivated toward solving things peacefully. And so to just have this war plan be there and basically already be in motion, that's not yours, He didn't run on that or anything. It's just, and I'm assuming that kind of caught him off guard.
Kennedy had served in war, and he was also, I think, young enough that because he grew up a lot more than a lot of other people did in the era of, oh no, we could end the world.
Oh sure, yeah.
With this,
yeah.
And he was the one that kind of got to develop the playbook for how that works.
Yeah, there was none up until this point. Like, yeah.
He got to see how badly that went, but
So some things went wrong here. Obviously, we don't own Cuba. The United States, it does not own Cuba at this point. Cuba is still very much under its own autonomy and still very much under the rule of Raul Castro. So, of course, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how did this go awry? You have a couple of issues here. The first and the biggest one is that the Cubans knew the attack was coming.
We weren't quiet about it at all.
And there were several reasons they knew this. The first thing is the Cubans have and have always had a very good intelligence network. I mean, the Castro and his apparatus just run a very top-notch intelligence apparatus. And so they just know kind of things that are going on. They got people everywhere.
Cuba has always understood that they're too small around the big countries around them,
fish, yeah.
that they can't have a big army that they can hold off. But if they know enough stuff, they can kind of make them stay away.
And they can mitigate. They can mitigate some of those factors. So this is a very good idea, having a good intelligence force.
Especially when you're like, I can go tell the big daddy Soviet Union over there the stuff you want to know. That makes it way easier for your information to be dangerous.
Right. But in this particular case, it doesn't seem like they needed this extensive intelligence apparatus because there was a lot of loose talk by members of the CIA, by members of Brigade 2506, and the information about this was printed in the newspapers.
Yeah, early parts of this, I was like, man, this is why you maybe don't want your intelligence people to be designing your battle.
It's also what we're talking about in operational security.
Because I was like, oh, practical stuff, and they're like, and then it was in the newspapers. I'm like, okay, so that's not the CIA's fault. That's just
that's loose talk. That's people who aren't supposed to be speaking, who are speaking because they have too much information. Brigade 2506 was not originally supposed to be told that they were being financed by Uncle Sam. And eventually that veneer was dropped, and it shouldn't have been, honestly. Like the whole idea of not having the U.S. involved, they didn't go into it. Like they really didn't commit to it, is what it appears here. The other huge thing here is that the CIA didn't tell Kennedy that the Cubans knew that this was coming. So you have a whole lot. You got this issue of operational security, right? You got this issue of not being informed of everything that's going on, and then everything starts to kick off. There even with the foreknowledge, there was successful saboteur work that was done in the weeks prior to the Bay of Pigs invasion, and there were some airfields that were hit by some bombers that were kind of lent by the CIA. They were trying to be subtle and all that sort of thing. And the beachhead was eventually kind of established. But the problem here was they didn't commit to it, was one of the big issues. The plan either required one of two things. It either required twice the number of forces that they put in there, or it required heavy air and naval support. They received neither of these things.
No.
They
got some naval support.
1,500 people just dumped on an island and expected to fight an army. The other thing is that the training that these soldiers received was primarily orientated toward the ideas of saboteur work, infiltration, working once you were inside the country, not necessarily as a large military unit, but as a partisan force, as a guerrilla faction, right?
Which is great when you have all those other things keeping the military busy.
But when 25,000 soldiers from the army are able to descend upon your position in an area where Castro also operated. This is the thing that kind of blows my mind, is that this is one of the areas that Castro hid out in when he was doing his revolution against Batista. And so he knows all the tricks of this area. He's fully well versed in how to get around in eastern Cuba. This is bread and butter to him.
I mean, and when you're talking to someone that used to be a guerrilla leader, this is down to oh, watch out, that tree's going to fall over soon. It's rotten on the side.
Right.
This is a level of battlefield awareness that you can't ask for better.
And so, originally when the battle kicks off, Fernandez was in charge, but Castro comes and personally takes command of the operations here. And normally, we would argue against this. Normally, I would argue against a politician getting directly involved in military matters. Hitler.
All of Rome.
Because it complicates things. Again, like if Hitler had just listened to Guderian, the Eastern Front would have ended. Again, I'm not saying that
We're
would have been
really
a good
lucky
thing.
this didn't happen.
Right. But Hitler getting directly involved was the doom of the plan on the Eastern Front. Castro getting involved was a completely different thing, because Castro was not only a proven battlefield commander, not only a national war hero, but he was a practiced partisan. Like he had been a guerrilla fighter for a long time. Like that was a way of life. I wonder if he even slept on the floor in the presidential mansion because he couldn't stand the bed.
Probably at first, at least, yeah.
That's how involved he was. And so for him to get involved in this way was not necessarily a negative, because he was a guy with really good experience in this particular matter. So he gets involved, he brings all the forces to bear, and Kennedy does not deliver on the air support that would have been required at this point. And also at this point, because the U.S. had been so loose-lipped about the plan, the international community was wise to it. So there was no sympathy for a U.S. intervention. They were like, guys, we see what you're doing. It's not cool. Maybe
don't
back
invade
off."
sovereign nations.
Yeah. So what this did, though, was it shifted a huge amount of political power to the USSR. Is so much so that we had the Cuban Missile Crisis arise from this, from nuclear weapons being planted in Cuba, right, 90 miles off of Florida, which was one of the most scary moments in history in terms of world-endingness.
Well, and if Castro was uncertain about us before, he actively hated us after this, because we tried to take him out.
We proved it. Not only did we try to assassinate him, but we tried to invade his nation. And also, before this, remember I had mentioned that the revolution had been made up of a lot of disparate, thank you, units, different factions, who didn't necessarily agree, and a lot of whom weren't necessarily on board with the whole communism thing, weren't necessarily on board with Castro as a leader. There might have been a grassroots revolution that arose naturally that took him out. Not after this. Not after he was able to prove himself the defender of Cuba and able to use the state media to spin it as great propaganda. This cemented his rule.
Well, and also just now it's cemented that there was this direct enemy, and here's proof they invaded 90 miles away.
Yep.
That is less than the distance between Missoula and Butte.
Which
does not mean much to most of you people, right. But and it made Castro hate us, as I already said, but hate us so bad that he not only was like, sure, you can put some nukes on my island, Soviets. I think you should fire them. Yeah.
We're all very glad that Kennedy and Khrushchev decided not to
play that day.
Yeah, but so again, within this Bay of Pigs operation, you can see a number of things that went wrong for America that went very right for Cuba. You had this issue of they didn't have the operational security, and Cuba was able to get forewarning and have a really good plan as to what they were going to do when this force hit and how they were going to manage it. You had the issue that Kennedy and the other American leaders were not very well informed of what was going on and couldn't make very good decisions because of that. It was kind of a cluster.
It was just a cluster. That was the word I was going to pick. That's exactly it.
So, today we've kind of gone over what the talents we're looking for in a general, some ruses and stratagems, and then we talked about the Bay of Pigs. I think it's been a pretty full conversation.
It's been a hectic conversation here. I don't know why I chose hectic there, but it kind of has.
No, yeah, that could work. But if you're still looking for more shows to listen to, if this hasn't wetted your whistle, you can always go over to the Earworm Network and check out some of our sister productions.
Yeah, you can check us out on the website. It's EARVVYRM. You can listen to me talk about nerdy things. There's a podcast about horror shows, movies, whatever. There's other podcasts coming on the way. You can also check out this show's website at taowargaming.com. That's taowargaming.com.
If you haven't had enough of your dose of Tau for the week, we also have a Facebook and Instagram where I post memes kind of related to what we were talking about, and also player profiles, people from the wargaming community who I think are pretty cool and I want to talk about. So, you can find us on that's The Art of Wargaming. You can email me directly if you've got questions, comments, concerns, want to start up a conversation. artofwargamingpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah, but
The most useful thing you can do is you can subscribe, you can rate, you can review. I mean, honestly, reviews, not beyond just putting us out more into algorithm, out more in the internet, it helps us. When we hear from you, we know what you want better for your show.
For
our show.
For sure. But I think for this week, this has been Yaga Malark,
And I'm Thumbs.
signing off.